Good evening. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to tonight's extension session that forms part of Renew's Sustainable House Day program. My name's Rob McLeod and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Manager at Renew. Tonight, I'm hosting the final session of our extension session series, all about solar and finding the right system for your home. In this session, we will explain how to navigate the installation of solar on your home. And we'll also provide an opportunity for audience Q&A with our wonderful panelists, as we do with the Sustainable House Day extension session. This session closes our Sustainable House Day extension session series. If you haven't already, there's still time to purchase an extension session pass, which gives you access to the recordings of any of the last 7 sessions that you might have missed. We'll be sharing a link in the chat tonight. Tonight, I'm joining you from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Usually I'm resident in the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I acknowledge that people are joining us tonight from the lands of many First Nations peoples, and I encourage you to share where you are tuning in from this evening in the chat. Tonight, I'm so pleased to be joined by 2 experts in this space who will be generously sharing their knowledge and answering your questions. Firstly, I'm pleased to introduce Bobbi McKibbin. Bobbi is an industry specialist advisor for Solar Victoria, the Office and Community Engagement Manager and Director at Solar Integrity, and a founding member of Australian Women in Solar Energy and Renewable Albury-Wodonga Energy. In 2019, Bobbi was awarded the Solar Cutter of the Year award. This award is an industry peer award and was awarded based on Bobbi's above and beyond approach and lobbying the Victorian government in a state of crisis as the Victorian solar industry ground to a halt when the government put its rebate program on hold for 3 months. Bobbi's also a founding member of Australian Women in Solar Energy, as I mentioned. I'm also excited, so excited to welcome Gavin Gilchrist. Gavin is the project manager and founder of Inner West Community Energy Inc., a group he set up to promote renewable energy in Sydney's Inner West, which has an environmentally aware community but low uptake of rooftop solar. In that time, he's managed more than 250 residential PV systems in the Inner West and a few places beyond, working with multiple solar installers. Prior to this, Gavin ran his own energy efficiency company, Big Switch Projects, for 15 years until 2015, providing energy efficiency advice and neighbours ratings to owners and managers of large commercial buildings and offices. He was one of the founding program managers for the New South Wales Sustainable Energy Development Authority, being responsible for the design and launch of the Australian Building Greenhouse Rating Scheme, predecessor to Neighbours. His book, The Big Switch, Clean Energy for the 21st Century, was released in 1994, and I find that so pleasing in light of the big discussion that we're having about this big switch all of these years later. Before we begin, we want to give a huge thanks to our Sustainable House Day sponsors, the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action, NABERS, Your Home, Design for Place, Zonnen, HIP v Hype, Design Matters National, and Lighthouse Architecture and Science. Thank you so much for your support. It makes these sessions possible. Well, let's get started. So during our discussion, I'll be putting viewers' questions to our panel, and you can put your questions into Zoom's Q&A window at the bottom of your screen as we go. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Please be mindful that questions that are really specific and detailed or might be about a personal situation may not be appropriate for a panel event setting, but we will get to the questions that we can get to. As we get started, we think, as some of you who have attended these sessions already might know, we think it's really great to start by getting to understand a bit about why you, our audience, is joining us and what you're hoping to get out of the session. And to do that, we have a quick survey. So I'd ask my colleague David to open up the survey. For tonight's session, we're curious. Have you wanted to get solar for a while but are not sure where to start? Please answer the survey, and we'll give you just a few seconds before we close it off. I'll give it just a couple more seconds before we wrap up. Okay, very last call, and let's close it there. And if you'd be able to show us the results of the survey. There we go. Well, that's good to know, and that's a really good indication for us as a panel about where people are coming to us from. So 65% of people have wanted to get solar for a while, but are not sure where to start. Another 30% already have solar, and good on you. We're hoping to add some more people to your ranks through the course of these sessions. So on that note, let's get into some of the questions. And I'd like to start off by asking you, Bobbi, why should people install solar?
There's a world of, there's an endless amount of reasons as to why people would install solar and should install solar. So they're quite interchangeable, those two words there. We get a lot of people that are doing it for environmental reasons because, contrary to our previous government and some of the past governments that we've had, the general population really do care about climate change and creating better futures. Then you get people that are looking to future-proof against rising electricity prices. And with the massive uptake of solar from, the last decade, we actually saw it push wholesale prices down significantly in our electricity market, which is the largest machine in the world, by the way, our electricity market in Australia. However, there's been some events that have occurred that is now seeing it push back up. Plus, we're transitioning away from our fossil fuels because they are well past their expiry date. I don't think people realise they are over 20 years past what they were designed and built to produce power for. So we're well beyond what their capacity is. So we are transitioning to renewables because renewables is cheaper. And the most efficient way to generate power is to use power as at point of creation as well. So it's the most efficient form of doing it. So that's why we see the uptake of solar and batteries and renewables happening across the country.
Absolutely. And as we go through this conversation, it will be clear that there's so many reasons and so many times why people need to, should be considering this as an option.
One other thing, Rob, sorry to cut you off there, is around energy reliability as well, particularly in rural and regional areas where we have a lot of outages, and through the natural disasters that we've had over recent times, energy security is a big thing, and that really matters to people. So people are starting, and that's why we're seeing an uptake of batteries, is around that energy security and resilience part of it as well. Sorry.
And absolutely, no, and it's a really important issue, and I hope that in the questions we can get into some of those issues. So Gavin, one of the main questions that we hear a lot when people are navigating solar is basically what type of system people need for themselves, and what size of system or what considerations they should have for their own system. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what lifestyle choices or other factors might people need to consider when they're deciding on what system of solar they need.
Okay, look, I think my answer to that question is going to some extent follow what Bobbi's already said, but perhaps with a slightly different flavour. So in my experience, so the two reasons people decide they want to put solar on there, and sometimes it's a bit more one, sometimes it's a bit more of the other. It is indeed climate reasons. So people want to take action on climate, and they're not prepared to leave it for the governments, and they feel a certain personal responsibility. And so that's sort of a lifestyle factor in itself, in terms of that's something that people believe in very strongly. The other factor is cutting energy costs, so the financial side of things. And as Bobbi just said, I guess, so they're the sort of two reasons that I see in sort of the Sydney region where I work. And definitely, as Bobbi just said, there's a third factor for people who live in more regional or remote areas, and that is energy security. So the factors. So if it's a money thing, well, people to some extent are looking for an optimally sized system, but that's a really difficult concept, because what is optimal? So for those 65% of people on this webcast tonight who are looking to install solar but don't quite know where to start, pretty much every installer these days, I think it's actually a requirement that they do a financial analysis of the system. However, as with all financial analyses, it really depends on the assumptions. So what is the optimal size system? Well, what assumptions will you make? What's the cost of electricity going to be that you're buying from the grid when you're not generating solar at night? Questions like what's the feed-in tariff going to be, and what is your consumption going to be when you change all the things you're doing around the house? I'm finding, I'd be interested in Bobbi's views on this. I'm finding increasingly people are saying we want to put solar on, but that's because we're planning on getting off gas over the next few years. I'd say until about a year ago, solar was an end in itself, but increasingly I'm finding people are coming to me saying it's a means to an end, and the end is getting off gas completely, because it really has twigged for many people, not all people, but for many people, that gas is a fossil fuel, and if we can generate electricity renewably with 100% renewables, that's better than a system with some gas or burning gas. And of course, there's the other issue of health implications of burning gas in the house. So how do we build a system that's optimally sized, and what are the factors? So there's money, there's your political commitment. Sometimes people have really strong political commitment to action on climate. So in terms of the size of the system, they want the biggest system they can possibly get. And in terms of the economics, the price of electricity there's an enormous range, and maybe we can get into this later, but as part of the process that we run here, I get to see everyone's bills, and the range of price is absolutely astounding. I was looking at one the other day in Sydney's eastern suburbs where they're paying 55 cents a kilowatt hour for peak power and 35 for the rest of the time. So that 55 cents is about twice what I'm paying. So yeah, in short, the lifestyle factors in terms of the optimal size and what happens, I guess I would say just go as big as you can afford, and as big as the roof will fit, because you'll never, I suspect you'll never regret it. I don't think I've ever met anyone who said, "Oh, I wish I had put in such a big system." And things are going to change. Things are going to change so fast in the next few years. Saul Griffiths in his book, The Big Switch, makes the point that we need to change 50 million machines in our houses over the next decade. That is, change 50 million things that consume gas now. Gas cooktops, gas ovens, gas water heaters, gas heaters, room heaters. That's a lot of things that are going to use electricity, and if you can generate it off your own roof, you'll be better off financially, and the planet will be better off.
Absolutely so, absolutely so. And when you look at the scale of the changes that are coming down the pipeline now and that we need to make urgently, it really puts a lot of this in perspective, and the need for solar and household engagement with them. I might just follow up that with you, Gavin, that given that we're getting into into questions of sizing and so on. But on a pretty basic level, like what are the types of size, like what's the range of sizes that you see on solar panels? And how much space does it take up on roofs?
Well, so I'm in Sydney's inner west, so predominantly these are smaller houses, but not entirely. The average size of systems through our group is just over 7 kilowatts now. So there's been an absolutely massive shift. I'm sure you've seen it too, Bobbi. It's 10 years ago when in New South Wales we had the massive feed-in tariffs. Basically, the standard kit was 6 panels, 1.5 kilowatts, and increasingly we are dealing with people here who are second-generation solar people. They're pulling that off. They're taking off 1.5 kilowatts and putting on 6, 7, 8. I can't give you the figures in terms of every network across Australia, but there are network limitations. In New South Wales, I think certainly in Ausgrid, it's 10 kilowatts for a single phase system. And in Western Sydney, it's also 10 kilowatts, I think, for a single phase. I'm not sure what the situation is in Victoria, but yeah, so systems are getting bigger and bigger. And of course, it's worth knowing for those people attending tonight, in terms of dollars, the bigger you go, the better value you get. So the dollars per watt figure goes down quite dramatically if you go beyond about sort of 3 kilowatts. If you get up to 10, 11, 12, 13, the price will drop dramatically. And if you think about it, there's a good reason for that. If you're a solar installer, there's obviously setup costs and just getting there and getting set up. If you're putting one panel on, you still got to get there. You still got to put a ladder up. You still got to do your safe work practices. You still got to run cables. If you're doing one panel or 30 panels, it's the same setup cost. So it's a point worth making to people tonight that in terms of my point a moment ago about going as big as you can afford, the bigger you go, the less it will cost you in terms of dollars per watt.
Yeah, that's a really good rule of thumb, and one that people should keep in mind. Bobbi, talking about costs, what sort of upfront costs are people usually looking at when they're considering a solar panel for the homes that you see?
Yeah, sorry, Rob, your microphone's cutting in and out a little bit there. It fades out a little bit. So I know a couple of others have commented, but it just disappeared there. But I think I got the gist of it.
My apologies. Basically, how much does it cost to install?
Yeah, cool. That can vary greatly from, there's so many contributing factors that come into costs. One, we have state, what state you live in, because there's government rebates. We've got the STC program, which is national, so everybody's eligible for that. But then we have some of the states that may have their own incentives as well. So like Victoria's got the Solar Homes program. If you haven't seen that, have a head to www.solar.vic.gov.au, and that will outline the rebates that they have available to people there. So there's one for solar power, there's one for hot water, and there's one for batteries, but you can't have all of them. In New South Wales, they did introduce a low income one for people who are obviously on low incomes. I'm not overly familiar with that one because I saw it as incredibly limited as to the people that would be eligible for it. So I don't think it was a great program. It's not my preference for a program. I'd like to see the New South Wales government doing something similar to the SolarVic program, because it is awesome and it has seen huge uptake. The other things that come into play is the different types of technology, the different brands. So with solar panels and with inverters, it's the same as any product that you're buying. Basically, there's various levels of quality in those products and also longevity. The issue that we have in this industry is that a lot of brands are not familiar to people that don't work within the industry. So consumers have no idea whether ABC Solar is as good as XYZ Solar or anything like that. So and the other thing to be very aware of as well is marketing companies. Unfortunately, our industry is fraught with lead generators and those sorts of things. But generally speaking, like at the moment, a 6.6 kilowatt system with the type of technology and brands that we use, which are your mid to high range, and that's because we choose products that hopefully we don't have to service frequently because of failures. So, you know, that your starting price there would be about $10,500, but then you can take off whatever rebates you're eligible for there as well. So that's where it's very, very different from state to state and what people's personal circumstances in some instances as well, because with the Solar Victoria program, you know, there's certain criteria that you have to meet to be eligible for their rebates as well. So I'm really sorry to not answer that question, but it's a very difficult one with such a spectrum that it could be. And
could I chip in a bit there?
Please do.
Yeah, look, I'd agree with Bobbi's sort of pricing. You know, we also, so we're not a solar installer, we're a community energy group working with what we call a network of preferred solar installers. There's 7 of them. But generally speaking, when I'm doing sort of public meetings, I would say the minimum you'd want for a system through our group, which is sort of the middle to the upper end in terms of the quality of the technology and also the quality of the installer, is about $6,000. So,
sorry. So my 10.5 that I said is without the rebates taken off. I'm assuming your value that you've put on that is with the rebates being taken off for your area. So that's where we'll have a discrepancy in those two figures there too.
Yeah, and that's in this part of Sydney, sort of my minimum $6,000 is after the SDCs, the rebates, but of course we don't have a state rebate, sadly, not yet. Yeah, so that's not for that wouldn't be for a 6.6 kilowatt system. So it really does. It's sort of like asking, how much does the car cost?
Yeah.
So that's why people struggle, because when they get quotes, the quotes can vary so enormously. The design can vary and the price can vary, and it's really, really hard for people to work out what's good value or what's a rip-off. I mean, we'll discuss later some of my tips, but one of them is if it looks too cheap, it probably is.
The other thing there as well, sorry, is installation factors. Installations, so we could be installing the same size system on 2 different houses, but their install costs may be very, very different, because one might be, might have a full switchboard that needs a full switchboard upgrade or something as well. So, or for whatever reason, one might need tilt frames. So there's all sorts of different contributing factors that come into that. So yeah, unfortunately, we're not buying a litre of milk from the corner store.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in our part of Sydney, it's sort of so for people from outside of New South Wales. So it's an inner city, older area with a lot of houses that are more than 100 years old. So some of them got slate roofs. So slate roofs basically is pretty much out of the question for solar straight away. But those houses with slate roofs often have an extension out the back that's just a flat metal family room, and that's perfect for solar. So even though you've got slate, it doesn't mean you can't go solar. But then we've got a lot of terracotta tile roofs, so that they are more labour intensive, hence more expensive. We've got chimneys to work with. We've got overshadowing to work with. We've got difficult access. We've got no parking. Nowhere to put your van off the street. Yeah, it varies. And all these are all the factors that are behind what Bobbi just said a moment ago, that does vary from house to house. And then you've got cable run. So the other factor is how long is the cable run going to be from the panels, which may be way out the back of the house on this new extension I just mentioned, but the meter box is at the front of the house.
Yeah, and I think it is really clear that there are so many different factors, and that for consumers it's important to understand some of these factors, but it can also be a challenging environment to navigate this and to get the right advice. I want to turn it to that question basically of, as a consumer, how you can approach this and how you can get advice and how you can trust what you're getting as well. And I might go to you, Bobbi, first. We've had a couple of questions coming in on exactly this. So there are companies that are promoting solar with no upfront costs, and it's pretty unclear what the arrangements are, or other sales which look like really good offers. How should people approach these, and how should people think about it or get the right advice? And as I put that question to you, I do want to apologise that I'm getting some feedback that my volume isn't working super well. So my apologies if some of these details are being missed.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's an area of passion for me, is around ensuring that customers have a positive solar experience, because that's what everybody deserves. You're installing solar for the greater good of something, be it to reduce your overheads, so that you feel more secure and you've got more control, be it for environmental reasons, whatever. You're doing it for the right reasons. Everybody is installing solar for the right reason. However, unfortunately, not all companies are selling solar for the right reason. There are an enormous amount of companies out there that are and that do amazing things. But as I mentioned before, we have some companies that that are either lead generations or that it's just their poor marketing skills, and they're not in it for the right reason. They're in it to make money, and often will unfortunately see a lot of those companies disappear. So the things to be careful of is if it does say 0 up front, you really do need to ask the questions. Because at some point in time, you will be paying an element of interest, or there will be fees incurred on that. It's very rare that we see a true interest-free arrangement. I have seen real interest-free arrangements, but they don't come along very often because it depends on who's behind them as to whether they want to make a buck or not. So in Victoria, like, you know, under the Solar Homes program, you can apply for a $1,400 interest-free loan. It's a true interest-free loan. But others, often they are, I've unfortunately seen systems sold for twice their market value as to what they would be if you paid up front, by the time you add on all the costs and the terms. So, you know, it might be 0 up front, but pay it off over 5 years at X amount of dollars per week or per month. You calculate that out, and you know, you better have a defibrillator close by, because it's a holy crap kind of moment when you realize how much it's actually going to cost you in that 5 years, versus having, you know, perhaps taken out excess from your home loan or something like that to be able to pay for it. They're the sorts of things you've really got to be careful of, and you have to be careful. So you've got to ask those questions. Is where does that come in, or do the math. Don't just take salespeople on face value. You really have to do your due diligence, because unfortunately, at the end of the day, it's the consumer that's responsible to do that due diligence. If you've asked the questions and you're getting misleading answers, or what they're stating is not clear, then by all means, you may have legs to stand on in a legal fight if it comes to that. Have I seen it come to that? Unfortunately, yes, I have. Not with our company, obviously, but because of all the work that I do within our industry, I certainly see and hear all of the horror stories. So you really do have to do your due diligence. Don't trust anybody who knocks on your door to sell solar. Don't trust anybody who rings you up at 6:30 at night to sell you solar and tell you the government wants to give you stuff for nothing. And don't trust any quotes that are written on the back of an envelope or an A4 piece of paper, or is off a carbon copy, because that will not have the information that you are legally required to have as a purchaser of solar. Like Gavin mentioned before, return on investment. That's not, if they're doing their quotes that way, they're not going to have any of that information in there. And consumers don't know that it's their legal right to have that information. And it's our legal obligation to give you that information. So the Clean Energy Council and a number of other people have guides on what to look for when you're choosing solar, and that's great. There's also websites that you can go to where you can get a number of various quotes, so that takes all the hard work out of it. You don't have to choose what installers you want to get quotes from, but be very careful of those sorts of organizations as well, because guess what? They're only going to give you the 3 installers who are paying them for that lead. So it's another lead generation. However, some of those can be really useful for knowledge and education and information on understanding different things. So you just have to be really careful out there.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice, and it is something that people do need to be aware of. Renew has certainly been involved over recent years with working with people in industry and other not-for-profits around certification and making sure that there's a clear code of practice for the industry. And there's definitely room to continue growing that. In terms of, I do just want to pick up on one point. This might be very, very state specific, and I encourage people to look at their own states or jurisdictions. But is there recourse to, get support from, the equivalent of a consumer affairs body or other type of government support if you're in a conflict like that? And that's probably one for you.
Sorry.
It's one for, and for you, Gavin, in New South Wales. My apologies.
In Victoria, you've got consumer affairs, or if you've participated in the Solar Homes program, you can go through Solar Victoria as well as another recourse there, because they take those sorts of complaints very seriously. I'm a serial pest at Solar Victoria, because if I see really poor marketing practices that are misleading, I will screenshot it and I will send them all the information so that they can action it, because that's where all our problems start. So in Victoria, you've got Consumer Affairs and Solar Victoria, if it's part of that. In New South Wales, you've got Department of Fair Trading, which are really good if they see value in it. This is the problem. Unfortunately, a lot of them don't necessarily see value in chasing it. There's also the Clean Energy Council, because if it's an installer error and it's poor workmanship, it can be tracked that way. You also have the electrical body in your state. So in Victoria, it's ESV. In New South Wales, it's Department of Fair Trading again, who's the Electrical Licensing Board. And then there's also the CER, which is the federal government thing. The issue is, though, and I do put it with a warning, unfortunately, a lot of these things we don't see come to fruition as they should, because people can't be bothered. People just like, nah, it's too hard, I can't be bothered, or they don't get return phone calls from whatever department it is that they've tried, so they forget about it, time goes past, all that sort of stuff. We do see extreme circumstances though where it does go forward, and it is, I've got a customer who lives local to me in a rural town, and he unfortunately got done by door knockers, signed up to it, didn't understand what he was signing up to at all. The salesperson kept coming back, knocking on the door, asking for more money. And unfortunately, this person was still not understanding, and he was just out of the generosity of his heart and not understanding. He was thinking he was doing the right thing and giving them more money. They came to me for information, and I sort of helped them out a little bit on different things and where to go, and then they got their own legal advice as well. And it ended up that went to court, that particular case, and the company that sold them the system had to reimburse the customer all the money that he had paid, and they were not allowed to set foot on his property. So they weren't allowed to come back and repossess or uninstall what they had installed, because thankfully the judge saw that case for what it was, and it was predatory, basically. Unfortunately, we have these companies out there that they do operate like predators. Basically, they look for the vulnerable in the community.
Yeah, and and thank you for talking us through that. It is a really important issue. It's not the full picture of solar, of course. There's so many positives, but it is important that we present the full array of issues for consumers so that people can be well informed when they're making these decisions. And that's the spirit, that it's important to take these things into strong consideration. We do have a number of questions have come in, and I think we should get into some of the questions from audience members. Thank you so much for those, and please do continue to put them in. I'm going to cluster some of them and put this to you first, Gavin. I've got a few questions basically about the direction of roofs and when and which, if you've got a west-facing roof or an east-facing roof, does it affect your ability to get solar? If you only have an east and west roof space large enough available, is it worth getting solar if you don't have an optimal alignment? Talk us through the direction of solar panels.
Okay, well, first thing to note is that if you're dealing with a decent installer who's coming to quote you, they have modelling. He or she has modelling software that will take all this into account. So in a sense, what I say now doesn't really matter, because you'll have an installer who will come out and they will model your roof. But but that's not a very good answer, because people want a bit more of an answer, and I can give a bit more of an answer. So there was a time some years ago when a south-facing roof, people would not, if that's the main roof you had, people would not have solar put on it. But solar panels have come down in price so much and have improved in terms of their efficiency that even a south-facing roof is okay for solar in certain situations. It obviously won't generate very much, particularly in winter when the sun's low, and as it is now, low and getting lower in the sky in the middle of the day. But in summer, I think the figures are that there's not a huge difference, particularly, I guess maybe in Tasmania, that I might eat my words, but because you're so far south. But for much of mainland Australia, even in summer, a south-facing roof will generate almost as much as an east or west side facing roof. There was a time when it was definitely all the rage to put solar panels on tilt frames, to tilt them up at the sort of degree of latitude of their location. So in Sydney, it'll be 34 degrees. But these days, I don't know about you, Bobby, but basically I'm not seeing installers almost probably 95% of the time, they don't bother with putting them on tilt frames, because it's much better just to put them flat. So east facing, west facing, north facing, it's not, I don't think it's in short, it's not an issue. The installer will decide what's best depending on the aspect, perhaps depending also on your consumption patterns. So if you're someone who leaves work early, not using much power in the morning, but comes home late afternoon and is cooking a lot and wants power late in the afternoon from your rooftop, then you'd obviously want west-facing panels to maximize your solar generation late afternoon, early evening. Yeah, so I guess my answer is basically, Rob, I'm not sure that it really matters that much. And anyway, in the installer, if he or she is doing a proper job, will use software that will come up with the right answer.
Yeah. So you'll have a good idea of it, and it's worth making that inquiry.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's
a little bit there as well. Yeah. Sorry.
Please.
I was just going to say, yeah, I can add a little bit there as well. Once upon a time, north was always the go-to. That was the best, However, as Gavin has said there, depending on what people's lifestyles are, east or west might be your best option, and north might be your second best option. So, we have incredibly hot summers, so west will give us a little bit of later production for when our air conditioners are cranking when we get home, sort of thing. So it's really having conversations with your installers, and your installers should be asking those sorts of questions anyway. Do you work from home? No, the kids don't get home until 4 o'clock after school, blah, 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 all those sorts of questions. So when we sell a solar system, you're not just going, here's your choice out of half a dozen quotes, there you go. It is very much a conversation to hone that in to then get a system that is going to best suit you. And we're not just selling a system. As Gavin said, we have software that we use to design systems. So we are designing it for you, or the installers should be designing it for you. It's not a one size fits all and we'll just slap it on the roof where it fits sort of thing. It is really making sure that you can get the best production that you possibly can in your situation. We're lucky in rural and regional areas. We have space. We don't have, the only shading we have to worry about is from the trees, whereas in cities you've got buildings and all sorts of other stuff that has to come into consideration as well. So yeah, there's lots of things there.
Absolutely. Gavin, do you see shading being an issue in West Sydney?
Yes, and look, this will be the same in every sort of in the city area, or even in in regional cities across Australia. Shading is an issue. I'm starting to think of a time when it's meant that we haven't actually been able to get a system that works. So people interested in solar on this webinar need to know that there's also the technology is there now to deal with shading in a way that it wasn't perhaps, say, 10 years ago. There's microinverters, which are little inverters that sit under every panel. There are optimizers for different types of inverters. Panels these days, there was a time when if you had sort of an array of solar panels and some of them were badly shaded at a particular point in time, that would drag down the whole system. But now there's a technology to make sure that that doesn't happen too much, if at all. So shading, yes, is a problem, but again, the software that installers use should take that into account. So where I am, there are a lot of older houses with chimneys. Chimneys are a problem. Trees are a problem. Other buildings being very close is a problem. But generally speaking, it's pretty unusual not to be able to find a spot on a roof for a system.
Yeah, no.
You'd have to be pretty unlucky, I think. Pretty unlucky to have a roof where you just couldn't fit solar.
Yeah.
I think in my 15 years, we've only had one or two that we've said no, it's just not worth it. And here we have mountain ranges and stuff that we have to contend with, and there ain't no moving them.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we actually, I just think of one. We did have one couple of weeks back in Paddington, in the inner eastern suburbs of Sydney. It was a terrace house, plastic terrace house. Basically, it was quite a small terrace house. Couldn't put it on the front of the house for various reasons, because there was a dormer window on the front of the house, and actually solar wouldn't have looked good anyway, and probably wouldn't have been allowed under sort of heritage guidelines. But there was a very small roof at the back, and the installer could only, despite his best efforts, could find space for 4 panels, and really it just wasn't worth doing 4 panels. So in that case, you know, I would say, well, do other things to green up your house.
Exactly, look to energy efficiency.
Yeah.
Well, and indeed. And I mean, do we want to touch on that? The question of energy efficiency in solar. If you're installing solar, should you be doing, I mean, this might be a bit of a Dorothy Dixer question, but should you also be taking on energy efficiency, and how should you be thinking about those two things together? I'll throw that to either of you that would like to take that on.
Yeah, for me, the cheapest power is the power you don't use. So if you can do energy efficient measures that then reduce your electricity consumption, then by all means, absolutely do it, because you're saving, you know, 100% savings and effectively immediately. And then solar can do the balance of it. So solar is a great tool, and that's what it is. It's a wonderful appliance, and it's a means to an end, and a great supplier and a great generator of electricity. But at the end of the day, you want to try and reduce your usage and your costs, and energy efficiency will do that. So, and I'll touch on what Gavin said earlier about transitioning from gas. So the New South Wales and the Victorian government have both made pledges to divest and get away from gas, particularly residential markets. So we're certainly seeing an uptake where people are wanting to change to all electric homes. Well, you know, that is then looking at what's the most efficient type of heating hot water, what's the most efficient cookers, what's the most efficient heating, cooling in an electric format. So you've got all these sorts of things. So energy efficiency absolutely matters, because at the end of the day as well, we don't have endless roof space. You can fill it all you want, but if you're not using your energy efficiently, or you could be using your energy more efficiently, it then gives you greater value out of your solar.
Look, I'd further to that, I'd encourage everyone listening tonight, when they finish this webinar, go and have a look at your most recent power bill and look at how much electricity you're using. And look at the guide. I'm not sure whether this is a national requirement or a New South Wales requirement, but I think there's definitely a requirement here that the electricity companies give you some sort of guide to how much you're using. So they say, you know, this is how much a household of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 people should use. Have a look at that. Those figures are not made up. I've got someone we've dealt with here who is just, there were two people living in a fairly modest house, but they did have a pool, and they were using, and they had a solar electric boosted solar hot water system that was about 15 years old, where the booster was on pretty much 24/7. So they were using an enormous amount of power. And according to that guide, they were using twice what a household of 5 people should be using, and there are only 2 of them. And when I pointed this out to them, they said, oh, I saw that, but just didn't believe it. But it is true. Those figures are not made up. So have a look at those guides. Bobbi, is that a standard requirement in Victoria on a power bill?
So in Victoria, on our electricity bills, I always steer people towards the graph that is on there, so that way you can see how your energy tracks across the year. And there is, one is your kilowatts that you're using, and the other one is your greenhouse gas emissions. So just ensure that you can differentiate, because some people will mix up and retailers will use them slightly differently as well. So that helps people then start to understand what their usage patterns are. And when you're comparing it, compare it to the same time as last year. Don't compare it to your last quarter, because there's a fair chance in that quarter we've had a whole lot of weather changes that impact on our energy usage as well. So all of that's really good. The other thing we do know as well is, excuse me, energy literacy, and that's what all of this is called, is understanding your electricity, your energy usage is called energy literacy. We do know that as soon as people have a visual on seeing their electricity and how it's being used, so through energy monitoring devices, it is proven that there is then about a 15% change, so a drop in their usage based on behavioural change, because now they can see it, and now they can look at it and go, why am I using so much power right now? What is going on? And they start to think about it. So it goes from the unconscious into the conscious, and then it's like, oh wow, why is my dishwasher on now? It shouldn't be on now. It should be on overnight at off peak, or it should come on at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you know. So it starts using my solar power instead of using my grid connect power. So energy literacy is a massive thing. And if you start to see how you're using your power, you will automatically become an Uber nerd like me and many others across the country, who will sit there and you will change how you're using your power and what is using your power. You will make more conscious decisions around those sorts of things, and you will save money that way as well.
Yeah. And Rob, I'd just like to make a point that is a pet hate of mine. And that is, you know, in the last, well, almost 12 months now, basically since the middle of last year, we've all been faced with significantly increased prices of electricity, and it's been a major political issue, and it still is a major political issue. But I wish someone would point out to the household consumer like ourselves that the price doesn't matter. What matters is the bill. And the bill is a combination of the price times the consumption. So if your price goes up 20 or 30%, as it has typically in the last 9 months, but you've actually worked hard to reduce your consumption, your bill will not go up. So, you know, it would be nice if a few politicians could start talking about electricity bills and helping us with our bills. And by helping us with our bills, that would mean A, helping get prices down, and that's more renewables, and B, helping us become a bit more efficient in how we manage and run our households. And to date, there's been precious little on that second point.
Yeah, look, I think it's a really, really important point. And, you know, Renew has done analysis that's showing that it's the homes which don't have solar, which have the worst energy efficiency and which use gas, which will face the biggest cost increase as a result of rising tariffs. So the homes which are energy efficient, have solar and are all electric will face a much smaller amount of cost increases and a much smaller amount of pain in the pocket as a result of changing energy prices. So it's a really critical issue, and solar is a huge part of it. We've got a bunch of really, really interesting questions, which I think we'll. I'm looking forward to getting into as many of them as we possibly can. Some of them are to do with the ongoing performance of solar panels and basically damage or ways of ensuring that they are performing in the way that they should. So I've got a couple here about the cleanliness of solar panels. You know, do you have to clean them? Is there a risk if you install them the wrong way that they are more likely to become dirty, for example, if they're done flat? Or, you know, can you avoid damage from animals or other sources of damage? Again, I'm happy to throw that to either of you that would like to kick that one off.
Renew is a non-profit membership organisation. Along with running Sustainable House Day, we also inform government policy, advocate for a fair energy transition, provide resources for climate disaster resilience, and publish 2 magazines. Sanctuary Magazine provides trusted independent information for people looking to build or renovate sustainably. Renew Magazine is a leading voice on sustainable technology developments shaping the energy transition. These magazines grew from member newsletters in the 1980s and still maintain their grassroots independence and practical approach. Both are incredible resources, and subscribing is a great way to support us to transform Australian homes for climate and energy resilience.
Bobbi?
Yeah, I'm happy to have a crack at that one. There's minimal maintenance required, but there is most certainly maintenance required. You have an electrical appliance installed on your roof. It is out in the elements 365 days a year, 24 hours, 7 days a week. So it is in your best interest that you have a professional person and a qualified person inspect your system periodically. A lot of the electrical networks, so that's your Ausgrids, your Essential Energies. In Victoria, we've got Powercore, AusNet, whoever else, they will actually recommend that you have your system checked by a professional once every 2 years. So, and that's not a bad rule of thumb. In some areas, you might like to do that more often. So we've got customers that will do theirs every year because a lot of people don't like getting up on roofs and checking things themselves. And we certainly don't recommend that, because one of the biggest occupational health and safety accidents we see is people doing work on their own homes. So you need to be aware of those sorts of things. But yeah, generally speaking, if we're doing a system check, is what we call it, in a maintenance program, we'll clean the panels, we'll check over all the connections to make sure nothing's come loose. We'll check over the inverter and make sure that it's producing as what we would expect it to be at that time of day. Make sure there's nothing that's impacting on your system's performance at all. And we'll go over that and we'll give our customers a report at the end of the day. There is absolutely a maintenance issue if you're installing your panels flat, and by flat I mean if it's not on a pitched roof or it's on a very low pitched roof. That's where the issue is. If it's on a pitched roof, the rain will hit it, wash it off, and they can effectively clean themselves to a degree. That's not always the case, but if they're flat, that water doesn't run off, and we see different things forming around the edges of the panels, and that can impact on those sorts of things. Another thing that we see often is moss growing on panels, and that's because of where they may be installed. They may not have the opportunity to dry out properly. You know, it could be a slightly shady area. It might be, you might be at the foot of a mountain. Those sorts of things can come into play. So it's absolutely advised to have your system checked, around approximately every 2 years, thereabouts. Another instance where people might do it more often is in rural and regional areas. If you live on a dirt road, cars throw up an awful lot of dust, and it travels an awful long way. But the other thing we see is, like, we had a house that was around the corner from where our old workshop was, that was 50 metres away from a petrol station and diesel. So those sorts of things, their panels were putrid because of those sorts of pollutants settling on their panels, because they were across the road from a transport company, and then also had the service station that was 50 metres away. So there's those sorts of extenuating circumstances that you would look at. But again, you can ask your installers. Do be aware, a lot of installers don't want to do maintenance. So it may be something that you might have to look at elsewhere. But in saying that, I believe a good installer would offer some sort of maintenance program to the products that they're installing.
Just picking up on Bobby's point about the service station nearby some panels. So I would say I've heard the installers that I deal with all say, oh no, when asked this question, no, panels do not need any maintenance, because people say, oh, how much do I need to do any maintenance? And they will say no. But I would agree with the point, particularly, I'm not sure I agree with that. My own panels, I've got an 8 kilowatt system, went in June last year, and just before Christmas, I went up on the roof to have a look at them, and they were filthy. And the reason they were filthy was I had a tree right next to them that was one of those trees that gives off a huge amount of sap. And it was a tree that produced very delicious berries. And I had a possum that loved those berries. So about 4 of my panels were covered in possum poo. And the other factor, similar to the service station issue, is where I live, I'm very close to the flight path for Sydney Airport. There's plenty of places, well, every metropolitan city has an airport, and if you're under the flight path, I imagine there's probably some jet fuel coming down from time to time, sadly. Yeah, so I'd say typically no need for maintenance. I reckon Bobby's rule about every 2 years is a pretty good run. I don't think that by and large these panels are self-cleaning though, are they? No.
Yeah, no, okay. Yeah, so really, really important points. In terms of another group of questions which we've had come in, and again, I'll cluster some of these, is around the roof itself. So does the type of roof you have affect what solar panels you should choose, or whether you can have solar panels at all? Are there optimal types of roofs? There was a really interesting question about whether anyone's actually made solar panels the roof themselves, and whether that's ever been a tech that's been developed. Yeah, is that, Bobbi, I'll throw it to you first.
I'm going to get into a huge amount of trouble here. There is a product that is Australian made that is a roof tile now. So I'm really, really sorry to the guys at Leeson Group. I know you are going to kill me. If you look, Leeson actually have, it's designed in Australia for Australian climates and everything as well, that is effectively a roof tile that is a solar, a little solar panel. Volt, I think is what it's called. God, I hope that's right. Can you just check that, please, Brett?
We'll put something in the chat.
Yeah, that's it. I'm really, really sorry. The boys will kill me. So that is something that is coming out. It is a premium product. They've spent, an enormous amount of time and energy into creating that. It is awesome for your metropolitan areas and your high-end market. There are certain roofs that a lot of installers will not touch. Like I know Gavin mentioned before about terracotta. I know a number of installers that are pulling away from installing on terracotta because it's just, they are a high risk tile of cracking. And what happens when we have cracked tiles is we have leaky roofs. So, and it might not be in the next downpour that you find it. It might be 12 months down the track or something that you find it. So there's a lot of concerns around there. I did notice, and I just want to put a huge shout out to everybody that's putting questions in, because there's some great questions coming in. There was one there about pressed tin, or a tin type roof that wasn't a colour bond roof. A lot of installers won't touch pressed tin roofs because, well, I don't know any installer that would actually, to be honest, because they are at high risk of getting micro cracks in them. And if they get micro cracks, that's a split in the tin, which then is a leak. So there's those sorts of things where the installers will be very careful. But if we're installing on a tile roof, like for us, for argument's sake, we've always got spare tiles with us so that we can, make sure if one cracks or something like that, we can replace it and change it out so that it's also not noticeable to anybody aesthetically. So you haven't got a red coloured tile with one dark grey one in the middle sticking out like dogs' proverbials, so that you know, you can strategically change tiles out so that it doesn't impact on the aesthetics that way. But yeah, there's definitely certain roofs that people don't like installing on. And we now have a big issue around multi-storey houses as well. That's becoming a big issue around safety for people to install on safely. So there's lots of conversation in the industry about installing safely on multi-storey homes too.
I guess I'd add to that, Rob, that if installers in this part of Sydney didn't do terracotta roofs, then they wouldn't be doing a lot of installations because there are just so many terracotta roofs. But typically what happens is they always carry, when they know they're going to be doing a terracotta roof, they always carry a few spares of them because, as Bobbi pointed out, quite often if they're old and quite brittle, they will crack, and they've just got to watch out for it. And again, that's a reason why you need, you know, an installer who is careful in his or her work and has done terracotta before and knows how to deal with it. On the roof tile issue, if I could just add, I'm pretty confident. Yeah, I did read the other day that Tesla has a roof tile. I'm not sure whether it's in Australia. The article I read was about the Tesla roof tile in America and how it wasn't selling and how it's not been particularly successful. I don't know why that is. It's probably very expensive. Maybe there are technical issues, but there is a Tesla roof tile. Certainly, I think it was in California where this article was based.
Yeah, interesting. And
yeah, Tesla tiles aren't available in Australia. And yes, the solar tile that I was talking about is called Volt.
Yeah, and we've and my colleague James has put a link to Volt in the chat.
Well done,
so
James.
absolutely encourage people to check that out. We while this isn't about recommending particular brands or particular commercial providers or anything like that, it's independent advice of all of that. Are there particular types or features of a solar panel that people should be looking out for? So, you know, are all the solar panels that people are buying on the market today the same, or are there differences that people should look out for?
There's all sorts of things that can make one solar panel different to another. Their production is going to be the same, because if it's a 400 watt panel and it's rated at a 400 watt panel, regardless of how that's made up, it's rated at a 400 watt panel. The things that you want to look at though is the company that the brand it is. So do a little bit of research on them, where the warranty is held. So you want to ensure that the warranty is held in Australia, because if something goes wrong, who do you contact? How do you get that rectified? And what happens if that company stops making solar panels? Like we saw one of the biggest brands in household appliances pull out of making solar panels 12 months ago. But because of how they are set up, they are supporting their solar panel customers for the lifetime of that product, because they have a diverse number of other products and stuff that they produce as well. So they are definitely protecting their reputation. So you really want to make sure of where the warranty is held, and also how long for, because you can, and also making sure it's realistic, because there's some really ridiculous warranties that we see in solar panels as well. Industry standard is around 10 to 15 year product warranty with a 25-year limited output warranty. That's a lot of marketing companies will just say, oh, it's a 25-year warranty. Well, what does that mean? What does that 25-year warranty mean? Is it full product, or is it only limited workmanship? And if it's limited, by what factor is it limited? Because in some instances, it might be the customer who has to pay the electrician to come out, fault find, take that panel off, or the number of panels that are affected, send them back to whatever company to get tested, and then the company says, yes, okay, that's a warranty, we'll replace that. So they'll send you replacement panels, but it's still the consumer who has to pay for those panels to be reinstalled and that sort of stuff. Whereas you have some companies out there that are offering full product warranties for the whole of whatever their longest warranty period is. So 25-year full product warranty, that's awesome. But you're also paying a premium for those sorts of panels as well. So, but they're also generally companies that are going to be around for the long term. We are starting to see more people offering it because they want to get in on that market, because they know it's a niche market. So that's where you've got to delve into those questions that I mentioned before. Where is the warranty held? That's the real big one. And if something goes wrong, or if your solar company decides no longer to operate in 3 years' time, they get out of solar, or they go under, or whatever happens, because we see that a lot, then who do you go to? How do you then claim a warranty if your solar installer is now become a butcher? Who do you go to in that event? So they're the sorts of questions that you need to ask of your installers and of their products as well. So not just solar panels, but of their inverters and everything as well. Yeah, and where they're made is a big one. And another really big thing coming through at the moment is, and I've forgotten the term, is around slavery, modern slavery statements. That's another really big thing that's impacting our industry at the moment, which is wonderful, because we have some companies out there that have got amazing modern slavery policies, but not only that, they have the actions to back it up. So that's what we really want to make sure, is that nobody is being abused or taken advantage of in any way, shape or form in production of what they're doing.
Absolutely. So, and Gavin, I'll go to you, then I'll put another question to you as well.
Oh, can I just answer, just add to that? Look, I'm really, so people concerned about sort of the quality of the panels and the quality of the support of the panels. I'm really not that fussed about panels, quite honestly. The solar industry is a very mature market. It may be something that people, as we said at the beginning of this webinar, 65% of people answering the question are thinking of going solar but haven't yet. So this is a purchase you haven't made yet. I accept that. But 3 million Australian households have made that purchase. And in the 10 years or so since solar really took off, there have been multiple times when products have been culled from the Australian market due to lack of quality control. And so now, really, I'm not fussed about panels. I'm slightly fussed about inverters, but by and large, what I'm really concerned about is the quality of the installer. Picking up on Bobbi's point, if I was buying solar today, I would want to make sure I would be less fussed about the panel. I wouldn't be fussed at all about the panel specified. I would like to know about the inverter, because the inverter is the thing that's most likely to go wrong if anything goes wrong.
Well, let's talk about. Well,
but Bobbi's point about the installer becoming a butcher, that would concern me. I'd want to know whether the installer is going to be around in 3 years' time. If my monitoring system does show that 2 panels have failed, I want to be able to ring up the installer, because the warranty rests with the contractor who puts the panel in. They then chase it up with the supplier, of course, but initially the warranty is with your solar installer. Rob.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and I'll take you up on that point of the inverter. So we do have a couple of questions about inverters and also AC and DC power. Would you say that you've got more concerns about inverters? What is an inverter? Is it always baked into the solar system? So do you need to worry about it as a consumer, and what can go wrong with it?
Well, the inverter is the electronic box of tricks that sits on your wall somewhere, hopefully out of the sun at all times. And it basically takes the DC current from your solar panels and converts them into typically about 230 volt AC electricity, which is the electricity that the grid runs on across Australia and that your house uses. But it does a whole lot more than that. The inverter, so all the inverters by and large that we're talking about, I guess, tonight, are people who are on the grid. there may be some people who are looking at putting solar in who aren't on the grid, but let's assume everyone's on the grid. So they're tied to the grid and they take their lead in terms of voltage and frequency from the grid. So they're called grid interactive. Yeah, the inverter is a very complicated, very clever piece of electronics. And like all electronics, they've got bits that can fail. So I would urge people to not go cheap with the inverter. You know, at least buy something that's sort of mid-tier. But again, there are, maybe we won't mention names tonight because we don't want to be sort of promoting any particular brand, although I'm happy to if people ask. But there are sort of cheaper inverters that the installers that I deal with wouldn't have specified 4 years ago, but they now are. And that I think inverters have got to the point now where they're by and large, they're very reliable. But I still think if you've got the money, it's worth paying a bit more for a mid-tier or premium inverter. That's what we do at this group.
To give you a bit of an idea, we use maybe 4 brands of inverters and that's it. And there's hundreds available on the market. And that's because, so like in our area, I don't know how many years ago, like we had a massive issue where we had out of town metropolitan companies coming into town and they did all these big bulk, big cells and door knocked and blah, 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 and sold all these systems and racked off back to the cities and completely forgot about anything remotely looking like service for the customers that they had just installed for. And we had a series of storms. We had a particular summer storm season, and I reckon we could have employed an electrician full time to be changing inverters for people whose systems were just dying every time there was a storm, every time the wind changed, it seemed like as well. And they were cheap brand inverters. Your inverter is the brains trust of your solar system. So making sure that it is a quality inverter is paramount. And it's funny, it's a bit like Holden and Ford. Installers will have their preferred brands of ones that they install. There'll certainly be a number of installers that will choose one based on cost, but there's also a lot of installers that will choose based on quality and backup service from the company if they need technical support, because one of the biggest issues we face in a modern world is communications of electronic devices. And when those comms go down, your best friend is technical support of the company that owns whatever product that is. So they're the sorts of things that we as installers will look at, is those sorts of things.
Yeah, and if you're installer, you're struggling to get your inverter to communication system to talk to the home Wi-Fi or to a 3G network, you really don't want to be sort of on hold for 3 hours waiting to talk to some technical support. So that's one of the reasons why installers pick certain systems, because they know that if there's a problem, they can get it fixed quickly and move on to the next job.
Yeah, no, really,
and I guess, yeah, and the other thing I'd say about inverters is inverters are becoming more and more complex, because not only do they just link you up to the grid, but also there's batteries going to be connected to them, there's EV chargers going to be connected to them, and smart home controls can be connected to them. So, there's lots of bells and whistles that can go on top of basically the inverter. Yeah,
and that's a really, really critical issue. And let's get into that question of how your solar connects and interplays with the rest of the home, particularly changes to energy storage, so home batteries, and the emergence of EVs. So this is something that's relevant to inverters, as you say. And I do have some questions coming in about inverters. As I'm posing this question, I'll just take the chance to mention that I do see there's a lot of questions about brands of inverters, and my colleague has posted links to some buyer's guides that Renew has put out in the past with extensive listings of brands, and encourage you to have a look at that independent advice. So coming back to that question, for people who are considering, first of all, I guess, let's assume that a lot of people are considering home energy storage or conversion to EVs and home energy charging. Does that affect the solar system that people should choose? And if so, in what way? And I can throw that to either of you. Bobbi, I'll put it to you first.
So from our perspective, we've got a lot of people at the moment that are absolutely taking the transition to all electric homes very seriously, and they're certainly the early adopters. And a lot of those people do have EVs. There's a lot of different things that are happening in that market. So at the moment, we don't have EV to grid. So that's where you can't connect your electric vehicle into the house and use the electric vehicle's battery at this point in time. There is a trial on that is occurring in the ACT, but it'll be a little while before we see the results of that. Will it happen in the future? Absolutely. When? Who knows? So there's a lot of people that will look at those sorts of things. The other thing that we are seeing is people are wanting to make some of those, or they're asking the question now in preparedness about what they do. A lot of people are wanting to go battery, so that then determines what kind of inverter you have as well, because not all inverters can handle battery power. They don't have the smarts to it. There's different types of battery systems as well, of hybrid systems. So I used to call them, there's dumb battery systems and there's smart battery systems. You've got some battery systems that will just give you power at night as the sun goes down. It will kick in and it will do that until it goes flat. But then you've got, and it will give you no backup power if there is a grid outage. So if there's a blackout, you'll still have a blackout on those systems. There's not that many of those systems around anymore because a lot of them have moved to the more smarter ways of being able to provide either a minimal amount of power or whole of house power as well. So, but also with that, if you've got batteries and stuff, you also then need to be aware about what's using your power, because if you've got a grid outage and you've got your air conditioner or your heater cranking, that will flatten your battery very quickly. So these sorts of things are all starting to come into play. Roof space is absolutely coming into play. Roof space is valuable real estate. That's why we're seeing the uptake of heat pumps and things like that in the hot water space, is because it's no longer taking up roof space, which allows more room for an extra couple of panels, which then helps people possibly, add more panels. Like I know for our situation here, for instance, we've got all our panels on one roof. We've got a battery. We're 100% self-sufficient basically here. But if we get an EV, I'll be filling the front of the house up with solar panels, which is then sort of on our southwest roof as well. So, but you can do those sorts of things in staged aspects as well. You don't have to go into this thinking, I'm going to get an EV in 5 years. I need to have the biggest, I need to have everything capable to do that now, because technology changes as we go along as well. So they're the different things that we would consider in those instances, is around those sorts of things. There's different inverters that can do different things. So that's, we're having that. It all comes to that key conversation that customers and installers have before the customer says, yes, go ahead.
I'd say generally in terms of, I know the situation in Victoria is very different because you've got a specific rebate for batteries, right?
Correct.
Yeah, which I think they had in South Australia for a while, but I'm not sure whether they still do, but certainly we don't here in New South Wales. So when people ask you, do we think batteries are a really good idea? I guess I'd say, one, batteries are really expensive. So, I mean, typically you'd want sort of 8 to 10 grand for a battery. I think Tesla's up about 16 grand now. Maybe they've dropped the price a bit, but it's quite a lot of money. And people I know who put batteries in are people who who are early adopters and who really want to minimise their draw from the grid, like Bobbi, and who want to sort of demonstrate the technology, which is great. Do I think batteries are a great investment? No. I think I'd probably say, and all these things is a matter of judgment, which goes back to sort of the lifestyle question, your very first question to me, Rob, in terms of, you know, what are the factors behind people's decision making? I'd say if funds are limited, and for most people funds are somewhat limited, just build the biggest solar system you can right now, and with a bit of luck, A, you might be in a state where a battery rebate comes in, or B, the price of batteries comes down, although we have been saying that for some years now and it still hasn't happened. And C, in a couple of years' time, as Bobbi has alluded to, your EV will be your battery, and your EV will have a much bigger battery than you could buy for 16 grand from Tesla. And we don't have the technology yet. I didn't know about the ACT trial. That's really interesting. I'd like to look into that. But basically, you know, in a couple of years' time, what vehicle to grid, I think it's called, isn't it? Or vehicle to home.
Yeah,
so
VG.
you'll be able to, yeah. So you'll be able to, your car will be your battery, and yeah, just go big with your solar for now. I think is a simple answer to the question.
Yeah, with so much change on the, going to say, with so much change on the way, you know, planning in a way that's going to be resilient to the changes to the energy systems that are coming our way is a really good rule of thumb. And sorry, Bobbi, you go.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to touch on that. So what our life will look like in the future when we have vehicle to grid capabilities is basically we will drive our EVs during the day. We will come home, we'll park them in the garage, we will plug them in. The house will draw down from the vehicle for that peak nighttime usage, effectively when you're cooking dinner in your home, blah, blah, blah. So between your 5 and your 10 p.m. sort of thing, when people start to go to bed. And then in our off-peak, or what's traditionally been our off-peak times, so from 11 p.m. till 7 a.m., that's when our vehicles will then charge from the grid. So they will charge from the grid at a cheaper rate. That's the ideal that we all believe may happen. But also remember, as our peak rate times, our peak usage times change, I believe they will change what those tariffs are in that period as well to suit themselves. So just remember, electricity companies are most certainly in this for themselves. They've got profits to make, and they've got shareholders to appease and all that sort of stuff. So they will certainly be making sure they're making their money somewhere.
I mean, I guess I'd add that Bobbi, that's in terms of charging our cars in the middle of the night. That's probably how the grid is now, and that's why we've had off-peak hot water for 50 years.
Yes.
But as the grid goes more and more renewables and there's more and more solar, the greatest glut of electricity will be in the middle of the day. And the challenge will be to make sure that everyone is doing what they can to use electricity in the middle of the day.
Yeah, we're seeing that now locally here. So we've been involved in a number of different trials around microgrids, and one of those sorts of things was having people's hot water systems turning on during the day to soak up excess solar. So it meant that their voltage rises weren't so high that their solar systems were dropping out. So that's a little bit of technical stuff there that might confuse some people, but it was how we could see more stability within the grid for not only for the grid but also for the consumer as well. So and if you had your hot water coming on during the day, that meant you weren't buying in overnight as well, and you were effectively heating your hot water for free during the day as well. So there's all those sorts of things that come into play into those questions.
I mean, Rob, it does just on that, just to finish on that point, which is not quite relevant in terms of the topic for tonight, but it does go. I guess I'd like people to get the sense of how exciting this all is. Like, we are going through a humongous transition. As I said, Saul Griffiths and his 50 million machines need to be converted to electricity, and we could get this really, really wrong if everyone came home and charged their cars at 5 o'clock, the network would just collapse. But if everyone came home and plugged in their cars and were using the battery power to run the house between sort of 5 and 8, and then the grid took over, charged the car, or their car was charged in the middle of the day at work somewhere, because everyone's got an EV charger at their workplace, and their workplace is an office that's got a humongous solar system on the roof. That's what we will need. But if this could go really badly, or it could go amazingly well.
I agree with you about how exciting this is, and there is massive change happening. I think it's such an interesting thing. The one thing to I might just add a tack on an element to this to wrap up this section of talking about sizing and future resilience of solar panels and the grid. And I've had a couple of questions come in, basically around the question of curtailment, or the issue of how much you can export to the grid. Will there be limits placed on people exporting to the grid? And that's something that we've seen potentially, coming in line in certain jurisdictions, and might become a feature of the system. Should that affect how you think about the size of your system? So does going big affect that in any way, or affect the grid more generally and others? I guess I'd just add into that, I've had some other questions about optimizing your system, which I think are relevant to that. So, for example, adding in new solar panels to an existing setup, and whether that's a feasible strategy, or optimizing the orientation across a range of different orientations. But yeah, will going big make sense in that context? Again, happy to throw that to either of you. Gavin.
In terms of the curtailment issue, in the Ausgrid network, which is basically the Sydney metropolitan area, you have a 10 kilowatt capacity. You're allowed to put 10 kilowatts in without any additional paperwork. That's like an automatic approval, and that's 10 kilowatts per phase. So if you've got a 3-phase house, you could put in 30 kilowatts, and that really is huge. 10 kilowatts is pretty big. And remember, that's 10 kilowatts at the inverter. So let's just spend a moment on that issue, because you are allowed to oversize your panels for the inverter by up to 33%. So if you've got a 10 kilowatt inverter, you could put in 13 kilowatts of panels, because that's 13 kilowatts of panels as rated as at their maximum sort of standard rating, which they hardly ever get to. So you could put in like a 13 kilowatt system with a 10 kilowatt inverter, which is a very typical sort of thing to do. I'm not sure how much curtailment there is at the moment. Bobbi, can you help me there? I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe in some country areas there's more than in the city.
Yeah, it's something that we come across often. Like every week we come across issues in our area, in rural and regional areas, around export limitations. And with the greater uptake of solar, we're seeing that creep into metropolitan areas as well. So I know there's definitely issues in and around certain areas of Melbourne, even around those sorts of things. And what we're seeing is with this huge uptake of solar, it's pushing our voltage in our network up, which then everything's designed to operate within safety parameters. So people's solar systems will drop in and out. So once it hits a limit, your solar system will shut down because it's not safe. And then when the grid voltage drops back down to where it should be, your solar system will start again. And so you can see that happening at multiple times of the day. We most commonly see that happening in our autumns and our springs. So when people aren't using heaters and people aren't using the air conditioners, the solar systems are pumping out in those beautiful blue sky days. That's where we see that. We also have issues in our area where people might be on swirl lines, so single wire earth return, which has, can have a number of grid limitations. We are seeing people grid export limited to 0, which means they can't export anything out to the grid. So those sorts of things are happening, and customers are certainly making decisions based on those sorts of allowances that your network provider will say yes or no to. Basically, we have to apply for whatever solar systems we're installing into the grid, we have to receive permission before we can install it. So they have to make sure that their grid is going to be safe for everyone, not just that one person, but for everybody around that person, to ensure equity around that as well. So, but what we are starting to see, and there is a trial locally here in the AusNet services area for something called dynamic exports. So this is where our inverter, which is that brains trust again, has the ability where things can be controlled through whoever your electricity network provider is. Let's use AusNet because that's my area. They might assess your application because for 3 weeks of the year or however long in that year across the year, your system may pose a risk if it exports more than 3.5 kilowatts to the grid. So they'll go, okay, that person, because of those 3 weeks of the year, are limited to 3.5 kilowatts across the whole year. Doesn't seem very fair, does it? If you're using it, it's not an issue. It's just that export, what you're sending out to the grid, that they limit. What the dynamic export will bring in is it will assess that and it'll go, oh, it's only across 3 times of the year. Okay, so if we do dynamic exporting here, what that will mean is that, so for those certain days, yes, we can limit it to 3.5 kilowatts on the days where the grid can't hold that capacity, where it's too much for it. But on the other, 48 weeks of the year, and forgive my math because it's probably wrong there, I'm just pulling a number out, but on the other 48 weeks of the year, or 49 weeks I think is right, they can export fully. There's no limitation there. So that then gives much greater opportunity to those customers to get greater benefit out of their solar system. So dynamic exporting is a very exciting change that will come to our networks. It may impact on some people, but at the end of the day, it's equity across the whole network for everybody. And I think that's what we need to look at.
Yeah, it's a key issue and something that people should bear in mind as they're considering this, about what it might mean for particularly your feed-in tariffs, but other uses as we go forward. But in our mind, it shouldn't affect the basic decision to get on solar. It's still very much the right thing to do for so many people. I do have a couple of specific questions which I do want to make sure that we get to during the panel. The very first question that we had tonight, which has been sitting here and I've been really keen to test, is wondering whether it's possible or viable to relocate a solar panel set up to another property if required. Is that easy to do, or is it something that people should consider when they're buying solar?
I've been in this industry for 17 years and we've done it once. And there's a whole lot of things that come into play there. Australian standards change very often for our industry. So what we installed 5 years ago on a residential roof, those panels may not be eligible to be connected to the grid again if they were installed today. There was a key element that changed, and it was around fire ratings for solar panels. That was a massive changer in that regard. And the other thing is often people will go, well, why bother? Because if I move, I can get the rebates again on the new house anyway. If you're installing a second-hand system, because effectively that's what it would be, you're not going to be eligible for rebates at the new place. You also then lower the value on your existing house. So remember, solar panels are valuable to whoever is buying your house. So it adds value to your house if you've got a solar system there versus not having a solar system there. So I've had a number of customers come in that have wanted to put their houses on the market, and they're like, the biggest question we've had, or the reason why it hasn't sold yet, is because it doesn't have solar power. So I need a solar system. What can you sell me? So, people are starting to see those sorts of things as valuable, particularly in rural and regional areas where they have been all electric houses for a long time, or it's all electric and LPG, which LPG is incredibly expensive, LPG gas. So yeah, so really, like I said, in my 17 years, I've had one customer that did it, and I think it was like within 12 months or 2 years of that system actually having been installed. As to when they moved it, it wasn't years down the track. It's just not worth it.
It's not worth it. Yeah, that sounds fair, and and it's something that, exactly as you say, will be important for the home going forward as well. I'll throw this one to you, Gavin. We've had, again, I'll cluster this, but we've had some questions about basically the lifespan of solar panels. How long do they last? How many years should you expect to get out of a solar panel? And I guess I'd add in a couple of additional elements to that. So what should we expect at the end of the solar panel's life? About disposal and recycling and sustainability of that question. And finally, I'll just wrap in with that a really specific question from someone who's been considering whether to buy a cheap solar panel system that they think won't last very long versus spend more money on one that they think will last longer. Does that ring true? And is that a usual consideration that people might have?
Look, solar panels last a very long time, 20, 25 years. They should still be generating a reasonable panel, 80, 85% of what they did at the start. So they have a very long life. There are plenty of those systems that I mentioned earlier in the discussion that went in sort of 10, 12 years ago when we were all doing sort of 1.5 kilowatt little systems. And as long as they've got a decent inverter, they are still working. So they last for a long time. I guess I'm increasingly seeing people who are pulling off systems and putting on bigger systems. Whether that's something that will happen again, because the system, whether there'll be third generation solar systems on houses, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure that panel efficiency is going to get that much better than it is now. I mean, the reason we're going from first generation to second generation is we're going from small systems to big systems, but we're going to systems that are so big that basically there's no more room. So I guess my guess would be that the systems that are being put in now, big systems that are being put on now, will be there for a very long time, 20, 25, 30 years. Recycling the panels, I think there are places now that will take panels, recycling. I guess there's two options. If you're taking old panels off, or if your installer is removing old panels and putting them and putting a new system in. Bobbi will probably have more experience than me, but basically in some of the installers that I've been working with, when they take the old panels off, they give them to some bloke in Sydney who basically fills up a container with panels and sends them off to a third world country in Africa, where they're very happy to have second-hand panels. It's either second-hand panels or no panels. So they're being used effectively in places that have very poor electricity supply at all, or you can have them recycled.
Yeah. Bobbi.
Yeah, sorry, I've got a few points on this one to say. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to sort of kind of agree but disagree with Gavin there. I would use the word should. Solar panels should have a long life. Unfortunately, we have seen a lot of very inferior product come into this country, and there were particular brands that were failing within 5 years to 10 years. So that was a massive issue, and will continue to be as those systems fail well before their warranted period, their time period. So that is a concern. So this is where doing your due diligence on the brands that you use is really, really important. And the other thing is, if you buy a quality solar panel, compare it with a cheap panel. Over the first couple of years, yep, their outputs and the return on investment will be very, very similar. But in a good quality panel, it will keep a higher return on investment than a cheaper panel over that 20 to 25 year lifetime of that product. That's where you see a big difference, is in that longevity. One issue we do have in this industry at the moment, and it is an incredibly frustrating one, is waste. We are seeing people that are pulling off perfectly good solar systems and putting on brand new systems, because the panels will look slightly different if they upgrade their system to what the other system was. So that comes down to aesthetics. So we're not doing anything for environmental purposes there, which is a real concern. The other thing we see, and this is something that's in Victoria only, we have a number of companies out there that are encouraging people to pull off their existing solar systems so that they can be eligible for solar power rebate through the Solar Homes program. You are not eligible if your solar system was installed after November 2009 for the solar panel rebate in Victoria. You will be made to pay back that rebate if it is found that you have been fraudulent in your signing up to that rebate. So let's be very clear on that. Again, poor marketing practices of certain companies. We are seeing a big issue around waste in this industry at the moment. Unfortunately, in a installer forum that I am in last week, we saw photos of a supposed solar panel recycler who has stockpiled thousands and thousands of solar panels under the guise of them actually being recycled, and they haven't been. Now, some of these panels are leaching chemicals into the ground in which they are stored on. That is a major concern. There are, however, a couple of solar panel recyclers that are recycling solar panels and legitimately recycling solar panels. We have one solar panel recycler in Melbourne who can recycle 100% of your solar panel, which is phenomenal. And at the end of the day, the other side of that argument is you need to have somebody who wants to buy that raw product back, and they have a market for it. There are a whole lot of people out there looking for the raw materials from what he has recycled his panels to. So amazing job there. So you need to do your due diligence. Ask your installer what happens at the end of life. The other thing I will say is that with sending old systems overseas, again, really important that you do your due diligence, because it is wonderful in concept and I support it. My preference is always to see reuse over recycle, because if the panels are suitable for reuse, why wouldn't you? And we are very limited into what we can reuse them for in Australia, but overseas, you know, there's countries screaming out for it. However, this is where we have some people again as well that are not doing the right things. If the panels are not being stored and transported correctly, there is an issue that I am aware of through local government, where they have now found, and it's not local government doing this, they were the ones who alerted me to it. Some solar panels that are being sent overseas are not being stored or transported correctly or in the best practice methods. And then by the time they reach that country, they are broken and they fail. And that is in high rates that is occurring. So all we are then doing is transferring our waste issue to another poorer country that doesn't have the ability to handle waste there either. So it's, at the end of the day, the one thing from all of this is due diligence. Do your due diligence when you're buying a solar system. Do your due diligence when you're replacing solar systems. Ask those questions and you will be satisfied. But there is an awful lot happening in the waste market locally as well. So there is a lot of talk around stewardship programs similar to mobile muster and paint systems that we have around paints and chemicals in the home and stuff like that. So the industry is screaming out for that sort of thing because we want to do right by the environment. We are an environmental industry and we must be doing better by our environment and not leaving it in a worse condition.
Absolutely, 100%. And you know, I think it's an important issue that work is happening, but there needs to, it needs to be something which we all take into consideration as part of this. I'm really conscious that we're coming up to towards the end of this session. It's such a rich area with so much rich information and details we've gone into, and so many questions that we could be getting through. So thank you so much to our panelists for covering this in such amazing depth. I do want to I'm going to ask I guess a question that I think takes us towards the end of this. And in fact, I know that this is something that you've thought about a lot, Gavin, because you've been working on your guide to the 10 tips for buying solar PV in 2023. And I think that sort of gets to a question which I saw from the audience, which was really, what are the real questions that you need to ask that you'll be able to tell the good from the bad? You know, what are the key questions that you can have for an installer or someone who's selling you a system, so that you know that you're comparing apples to apples and you can make a good consumer choice. And so that's one which I'm going to leave with both of you. But Gavin, I was hoping that you could talk us through your 10 tips.
Sure. I hope you can hear me okay, because there's an incredible storm happening as I speak, and I can barely hear you, but I hope you can hear me. Look,
Can hear you just fine. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, that's great. And I guess at one point I'd like to make that I think is relevant for the audience that's considering buying solar is that designing solar systems, it is a science, but it's also an art as well. And by that I mean, if you got 3 different quotes from 3 different companies for a solar system for your roof, the chances are they'll all be different designs, but they might all be right. It's just that each person who did the design has a different perspective in terms of what matters for you. So that I just wanted to make the point that, you know, there is an element in what I'm about to say, in my personal opinion of what are the top 10 tips, but this is what I've found over the years. And yes, I just want to make that point that, you know, there's no one answer to what sort of solar system you should get. There's no limit to the number of systems you could get by and large. There's no limit in terms of the combinations of panels and inverters and how they're put on the roof. And so yeah, it is definitely there's an element of personal judgment and experience that goes into these things. So here are my top 10 tips. So my first tip is this: you're the boss. So if you're buying solar, stay in control. Remember, you are paying someone to provide a service, so you control what you buy, how and when. So don't be pushed into something you're not sure about. This comes to our point earlier in this discussion tonight about never buy solar or anything, probably, from someone who knocks on your door. And if you have a bit of knowledge, that will give you a greater sense of control. Second point, and a couple of these points are going to be picking up on things we've already discussed, but it's probably worthwhile just hammering these points again towards the end. So my second point is know your house and your household. What sort of roof do you have? What's its condition? Which way does it face? You'd be surprised how many people tell me they've got absolutely no idea what their roof looks like and what its condition is. Make sure you know what your household energy use is all year, summer and winter, in kilowatt hours. We've covered that this evening. And think about how important it is to you that climate action is something that's driving you in your household. Third point is go small with solar installers. So I think you're most likely to get a good outcome if you deal with smaller, independent, Clean Energy Council accredited installers. In Choice's 2018 survey, the smaller independent installers rated much better than, say, Origin Energy did as a solar installer. You want someone that preferably lives nearby or lives locally. You know, some of the installers that I deal with, I know where they live, and they know I know where they live. Whereas if you were buying it from a large company where you're basically ringing a 1-800 number and that person might happen to be in Brisbane or they might happen to be in Perth, sometimes it can be very frustrating. So I really think it's good to go with local people who know local houses, who know the local network. Point 4 is set a budget. as big as you possibly can. As we've discussed tonight, no one ever regrets too big a system. Point 5, never decide by price alone. Have realistic expectations. If a solar retailer's price seems unbelievably cheap, it is. There are no bargains. If you want a fair price, not a cheap price. And you want your installer to be running a viable business that will be around for a long time. I really like this next tip. I shouldn't be saying I like my own tips, but this is what I really do like, because I think it really is important. And that is seek recommendations from family and friends. There are, as we've said, 3 million households with solar now. So you must know someone who has had solar installed in the last few years. Everyone, even if no one in your family's had solar, you will know someone at work or at the pub or at the golf course or at the bridge table or whatever. You will know someone who's had solar. Ask them how they went. Because I think a referral is really, really important. Bit of reading. Point 7, read the Clean Energy Council Buying Solar Guide. That's a really good guide. And the Solar Quotes. So Solar Quotes is a buying website. They have a thing called Solar 101, which is updated regularly. The last version was updated last month. It's a really good guide, and we'll answer those questions that we've had tonight in terms of what's a cheap inverter, what's a mid-sized inverter, what's a good inverter. And their guide I have found over the years is really, really, really useful. Consumption monitoring, insist on consumption monitoring. So Alan Pearce, the Renew columnist, wrote a column recently saying, which was headed, renewable energy is not enough, we must reduce consumption too. We've already discussed that tonight. Think about what you're actually consuming and why you can, if you are consuming a lot and that little guide on your bill says you're consuming enough for 10 people and there's only 2 people in the house, you really should look at that first and then work out what sort of solar system you want. I believe, point 9, it's the installer that matters most, not the equipment. So we've talked a lot about inverters and panels tonight. They do matter, but I think it's the quality of the workmanship that these days really, really matters. And my last point is be happy. This is probably the most positive thing you could do for the climate and the fastest thing you could do. And one of the best investment decisions you can make. So interest rates are going up, and what you'll get from the bank is more than it was 2 years ago if you put $10,000 in the bank, but you will get a lot more in terms of return on investment from buying solar than investing in Westpac. So try and enjoy the process. I mean, we've spent almost 2 hours tonight talking about things. We've covered a lot of ground, and hopefully we haven't bamboozled people too much. But I mean, it's a really, the people I speak to who've put solar on the roof, it's a very positive thing. It's a very engaging thing. It's a very exciting thing. People love looking at their apps. Sure, they might not look at them every day after 6 months, but they still like looking at them and looking at what they've generated. So try and enjoy the process, because once it's done, tell everyone about it. They're my tips.
And what fantastic tips they are. Thank you very much. There's a lot to take in there, but it's a really, really good approach to all of this. Look, I will take us to the end of the session, and I'm going to put one more question to each of you, and I'll start with you, Bobbi. If there's one thing that you'd like people to take away from this session, or one reflection that you have coming out of this conversation, what's the most important thing that you want people to take away from this?
I'm going to be greedy and say 2, because one actually extends on what Gavin just said anyway through his points. There is an old age saying called all the gear and no idea. Apply that when you're considering solar, because you can have the best products, but if your installer is not up to scratch and they don't install it with best practices and all those sorts of things, then it's, you might as well have gotten the cheaper system. So, there's real concerns around that sort of thing. So all the gear and no idea is a good one to remember, I think. For me, my takeaway is doing your due diligence, ask the questions. do a little bit of research. I'm not saying go and spend a whole day researching, because sometimes we can over research things and confuse our brains completely and utterly as well. But do your research, a little bit on the products, a whole lot on the installer, so that then you can understand and find a company that aligns with your values. Because if they align with your values, you're building a relationship. And that's the way we view our customers. We view our customers as though, you know, we're building a relationship, not because they're buying a product once off us. We're building a relationship with our customers so that they know that they can come back to us for support if they need it long after the installation. And they may buy a second or third, you know, or their families might buy from us and all that sort of stuff. We are in this to build relationships with our customers that then will help them achieve their goals around greater energy independence and you know, put the power back in their pocket, I suppose is what you could say. And there's a lot of installers out there and a lot of companies out there that are in it for the same reason as us. They're here for the right reasons. They're not here to make a quick buck. They're here for longevity, and they're here to look after you.
I find that to be a really, really powerful point. Thank you so much, Bobbi. Gavin, I'll give you the last word. What would you like people to take away from this session?
Look, listen to Bobbi. do your homework. Read the Solar 101 guide. Read the Clean Energy Council guide to buying solar. And talk to your neighbours and friends, find out who's gone solar and did have a good experience. Use Google reviews up to a point. They're good. Sometimes people post things, of course, that are not fair and not reasonable, but by and large, it's worthwhile having a look. Yeah, and enjoy the experience and show some respect to the installer. Like if they're specifying a particular panel and a particular inverter, and it's not a ridiculously high price or a ridiculously low price, I mean, basically the installer will be using his or her judgment for a reason. And these are people who are qualified electricians who've done a lot of training and regular repeat training programs. And so show them a bit of respect for the expertise that they bring to your house.
Yeah, and a wonderful place to end this session. So look, this does bring us to the end of this session tonight and completes the extension session series, which is part of our extended Sustainable House Day program. A huge thanks to all of our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much to Bobbi and Gavin for all of your expertise and all of your insights tonight. It's so deeply appreciated by myself and the whole Renew family. And thanks so much also to the people who are doing the work behind the scenes who you might not see on the screen, but a lot of work goes into making these sessions happen. And I'd like to thank the backstage crew, including James and David and everyone else who's been involved in this. Once again, I'd also like to thank our sponsors for this event. Thank you so much for making this possible and making Sustainable House Day possible. Finally, thank you so much to everyone who's attended and for all of your wonderful questions. We will make the recordings of the extension sessions available to those that booked and notify you when they're ready as soon as they are. As a bonus, please fill out the survey in the chat on your experience at Sustainable House Day to go into the draw to win one of 3 of the latest 6th edition Your Home books provided to us by our sponsors, Your Home. Thank you so much to that. Don't forget that if you join Renew or subscribe to one of our magazines this month, you'll go into the draw to win an electric scooter from Benzino valued at over $5,000. So please do follow the link in the chat to get on board. If you're thinking about these issues, and particularly home electrification, keep an eye out for Renew's Getting Off Gas Toolkit, which is set to be released over coming months. And please do keep an eye out for that for more independent information of the kind that you've heard tonight. On that note, thank you so much to everyone and have a great evening.